Welcome back to Midnight Signal AI. Today is June 18th, 2026, and we've got a day that swings from open standards to fresh regulatory pressure, with a few product moves in between.
Yeah, this one has a little bit of everything. Agent infrastructure, consumer AI features, frontier model politics, and the ongoing question of how fast these tools can scale before the downside catches up.
Let's start with the most foundational move first.
That's the kind of story that sounds nerdy until you realize it could sit underneath everything else. If agents are going to call tools on the open web, somebody has to solve how do you find the right tool, how do you verify it, and how do you keep the whole thing from becoming spammed to death?
Exactly, and because Google is framing it as an open spec, it's not just about Gemini or Google products. It's a bid to define the directory layer for agentic software.
Which matters because control of the directory can matter almost as much as control of the model. If developers start building against a shared discovery layer, that could become a pretty durable choke point, or a durable public good depending on how it's governed.
Switching gears to the company under the most regulatory heat right now.
This one feels bigger than a single headline because it hits three pressure points at once: user safety, data handling, and the actual harm people say they experienced. That's a lot harder to wave away than a generic policy critique.
And it lands at a bad time for OpenAI, because the company is still trying to move fast on consumer features while also expanding into more serious enterprise and institutional use.
Right, the more central ChatGPT becomes, the more every complaint gets treated like a systemic issue instead of a one-off bug.
Now on the product side, Anthropic shipped a major Claude refresh.
This is a good reminder that not every important AI release is a new model. Sometimes the bigger deal is making the product actually usable for a real workflow, instead of just impressive in a demo.
And Anthropic seems to understand that. Design system imports and round-tripping code back and forth is the sort of boring-sounding capability that can win teams over.
Plus, the token burning fix matters. If a product makes people feel like every edit is expensive, they'll look elsewhere fast.
Speaking of practical utility, OpenAI added more control over tasks inside ChatGPT.
This is one of those features that looks minor until you think about behavior. If ChatGPT can become the place where people queue things up for later, that is a much stickier relationship than a one-off question and answer session.
And it also shows OpenAI keeps pushing toward an operating system style role, not just answering you, but managing the little tasks around you.
Which is exactly why the safety and trust story matters so much. The more the product handles intent, timing, and follow-through, the higher the stakes when it gets something wrong.
Now to the most politically charged story of the day, Grok.
That's a seismic headline, even if the reporting is messy and comes through multiple outlets. Once a consumer-facing AI brand is publicly linked to military operations, the discussion shifts from performance to accountability very quickly.
And it puts XAI in a strange place. Musk often talks about making Grok sharp, fast, and unfiltered, but defense use cases create the opposite pressure: control, traceability, and very explicit rules.
Exactly. The capability may impress some buyers, but the governance burden gets heavier the moment a tool is used in a live conflict.
Let's bring it back to consumer deployment for a second, with a travel-specific launch.
Airlines are a smart place to test this because the user already has a clear goal: find a flight, compare options, book it, manage the trip. That's a much tighter loop than general-purpose chat.
And it's another sign that AI isn't just being sold as a chatbot anymore. It's being embedded into existing commerce rails where intent already exists.
Which means the winners may be the companies that make the assistant feel invisible, just part of the workflow, not a separate destination.
Last main story, a smaller but interesting builder launch from Hacker News.
I like this one because it's not trying to boil the ocean. It picks a specific workflow, keeps the loop tight, and uses the models as interchangeable engines instead of treating the model itself as the product.
And that may be the larger theme today. The biggest wins are happening at the layers around the model: discovery specs, workflow features, distribution deals, controls, and vertical integrations. Now, let's shift gears to robotics, Alibaba is making a pretty direct bet that the next frontier for foundation models is physical action, not just text or images. QN Robot is positioned as a suite for navigation, manipulation, and world modeling, which is basically the holy trinity of getting a robot to do useful things in the real world. That matters because robotics usually breaks down at the handoff points. A model can recognize an object but not plan the grasp. It can map a room but not adapt when the path changes. If a foundation model can better connect those pieces, it lowers the friction for building robots that are less scripted and more general purpose. It also shows how competitive this layer is becoming. We're not just talking about better robot arms, we're talking about the brains that could sit underneath fleets of machines.
And that is the part that makes this feel bigger than a product launch. If the model is good enough at world modeling, it could help robots deal with the stuff humans take for granted. Occlusions, clutter, weird lighting, all the everyday chaos. But it also raises the bar. Once you say a robot can navigate and manipulate, people immediately want to know in what environments, with what reliability, and how much supervision. Robotics loves to promise generality and then run into 1,000 edge cases.
Exactly. So the headline here is less Alibaba made a robot and more Alibaba is trying to standardize the robot brain. If that works, it could speed up research, benchmarking, and eventually deployment. And if it doesn't, well, it still tells us where the industry thinks the leverage lives, in models that can reason across the physical stack, not just describe it. On the hardware side, this is one of those stories that sounds niche until you zoom out. Jensen Huang being on the ground for Coherent's optical chip factory in Texas is a reminder that AI hardware is no longer just about raw compute. It's about moving massive amounts of data fast enough to keep the accelerators busy. Optical chips and interconnects are getting attention because electrical links start to struggle as systems scale. When you're wiring together racks of AI gear, the bottleneck can become communication, latency, and power, not just how many flops you can buy. That's why the industry keeps investing in the unglamorous parts of the stack. So even though GPUs get the headlines, the infrastructure beneath them is turning into a strategic battleground. The factory floor matters as much as the spec sheet.
Right, and this is also a geography story now. Building that capacity in Texas says supply chains, manufacturing policy, and AI demand are all colliding at once. It's kind of funny people talk about AI like it lives in the cloud, but the whole thing depends on a very physical ecosystem. Fabs, packaging, optics, cooling, power. The more digital the product gets, the more hardware you need underneath it.
That's the paradox of this era. The software is getting abstract, but the winning hardware story is all about better physical connections. And if optical interconnects keep improving, they could quietly shape the next wave of AI systems, not by being visible to users, but by making the entire machine room run better. And to end on a lighter note, or at least a more human one, Mark Zuckerberg saying Meta made mistakes in its AI workforce shift is the kind of comment that cuts through the hype. It's a reminder that behind every flashy AI strategy, there are people trying to adapt to reorganizations, shifting mandates, and a moving target. The tech gets the headlines, but the real story inside companies is often messy and emotional. When leadership admits that some of the changes weren't handled perfectly, that stands out. It's not glamorous, but it's honest.
Honestly, that honesty goes a long way. In a field where everyone talks like they've got the future fully mapped out, hearing "we made mistakes" is weirdly refreshing. It also feels like a sign that the AI talent wars are entering a tougher phase. Hiring, retention, morale, all of that matters when the whole industry is moving this fast. Across today's stories, a few things stand out. First, the center of gravity is moving from raw capability to infrastructure and workflow. Second, trust and governance are no longer side issues. They're part of the competitive stack. And third, the companies that win may be the ones that make AI show up inside real tasks, not just in impressive demos.
That's it for today's Midnight Signal AI. We'll be watching which of these moves turns into real adoption and which ones trigger the next round of pushback. Until next time, keep building, keep questioning.